Hey, this is Scott Massley. I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer for Thread, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about how to interview like a pro. There are a lot of aspects involved with the hiring process, but we're going to focus specifically just on interviewing today. The hiring decision is one of the most important decisions that a manager is ever going to make. It can really help you be successful. It can improve the quality of your team. It can contribute to your culture, your performance, and everything else, or it can detract from all of those really important areas. So you want to spend the time necessary to make the best hiring decision you can, because it will make a big difference in your career and satisfaction with your job as well. So make the right hiring decisions. Big picture, if you step back, is when you're looking at filling a role in your company, you need to know what the success profile is for the role. In other words, what do your best performers have in common? What skills and traits are you looking for? What kind of experience, knowledge, work habits, ethics, values, all of those things you need to know. So those will drive what kind of questions you're asking in the interview process. And then when I talk about finding ways to discover desirable traits, is there's more than just the interview, right? We have phone screens, we have video interviewing now, we have face-to-face interviews for those who are able to make that work at this time. But basically, you also have multiple assessments you can use. You can do reference checks. You can do kind of working interviews where you give people scenarios and see how they respond to those scenarios to kind of witness how they operate and see how much they know, things like that. And then there's more about designing your candidate experience, which is what does the candidate go through as they apply for and are considered for an open position. And that's important right now. So you also need to use technology as much as you can to make things easier for you and efficient for you, and also for the candidate experience as well. And then once you've hired someone, it gets to the employee experience. What is it like when they walk in the door? So that's the big picture process, but we're going to focus specifically on interviewing. What are you trying to get at when you're interviewing people? Well, you want to know, do they get it? Do they want it? And do they have the capacity to do it? Other ways to think about that are they eligible to be considered for the position, right? Do they have the experience, the skills, the traits, the references, the degrees, whatever it is you're looking for that make them eligible for consideration for the role that you have, okay? So if they have all that, that's good. Now the question is, do you want to do the job? Do you have energy and enthusiasm for the job? Are you excited about what you can bring to that position? Are you looking for a career with this company, and why this company? What is it about us that attracts you? What is it about this position that attracts you? And you keep digging into that, and we'll talk about that a little more. And do they have a capacity to do it? So you're looking for all of these things while you're interviewing all the time. You want to be intentional about the questions you're asking to make sure that you're digging into the specific areas that interest you, that are relative to that position. So don't just kind of go, it'll come to me. I'll think of a few questions. I got a few that I throw in. You want to know in advance what you're going to be talking about. So let's just talk about the first: phone screen, video screen. What are you looking for? You want to know in advance what few questions you're going to ask. You probably don't want to do a really long initial screen, because the idea for this initial screen is for you to help start to hone in on your top candidates that will get more time with your team later. So initially you plan your questions and responses, and these may be initial questions confirming information off of the resume, clarifying questions. How long did you stay at this company? What happened? Why did you leave? Those kind of things. Pay attention if the applicant shows up on time. Is the applicant prepared? Does the applicant look professional? And by that, I just mean, does the applicant look like they've prepared their clothes and that kind of thing, right? Have they shaved? Have they, all that kind of stuff. So look at that. Listen for what is said and what is not said. In other words, is there information being left out, right? A lot of times when you're looking at a resume or when you're interviewing someone, it's not what's said that's important, it's what's not said. So pay attention to that. Have your radar go up and ask follow-up questions when information seems to be left out of an answer. Don't be afraid to say, I'm not sure I understood that completely. Could you explain that to me one more time? Okay. Did the applicant seem prepared? Does the applicant know about your company, your position? Have they done it before? Have they researched you? Did they go to your website? Are they familiar with your leadership team? Or have they read articles about your business? Anything like that. I think the more candidates can show you that they are prepared, that they are interested in your position and your company, the better. And then pay attention to what kind of questions they ask. Are they asking you really intelligent questions that they've thought through? Or when you get through talking to them, do they just kind of go, I don't know? You know, you want people who are going to come to you prepared, because that's how they're going to come to work, ideally. And this is their chance to prove to you the habits they have for being prepared, for thinking through scenarios properly, for contingency planning, all of those things. So these are just little hints of how someone might operate when they're working for you, and they're all really important. Also notice not only the candidate's energy and enthusiasm that they have during this interview, but yours as well, because you're sending a message just like they are sending a message. You're representing the company as the interviewer, just like they're representing themselves as the interviewee. So pay attention to your body language, your tone, your energy, everything else as you're going through the interview. It's really important that you know what you should and should not ask. So I have seen over years of doing this that a lot of people ask questions they should not ask in an interview. And here's some lists of things that you should stay away from. So the topic is down the left side over here, like family, race, religion, residence, sex, age, things like that. And then the middle column is what you could ask. And then the right column are questions that you should not ask. You should stay away from these. So when it comes to family, you don't want to ask, are you a single mom? Are you married? Anything like that. You can say, in general, do you have any responsibilities that conflict with our job attendance or travel requirements? And if they say no, all right, do you have a reliable way to get to work? Yes. What you don't want to say is, do you ride the bus? Do you take a car? Right? You're saying, do you have a reliable way to get to work? Yes, that's the answer. Okay. You don't want to ask anything about race, anything about religion. Don't really want to know if someone rents or owns or has a roommate or the sex of their roommate, anything like that. You don't want to ask if someone is male or female, if they have a girlfriend, boyfriend. Do not want to ask about your birth date while you're phone screening someone or interviewing someone face to face. You'll get that later if you hire them. If hired, can you provide proof that you're at least 18 years old? That's a legal question that you could ask. In terms of citizenship and nationality, you can say, could you show proof of your eligibility to work in the United States? So we do the I-9, and we're going to need that if we were to hire you. Yes, okay. You don't want to say, are you a U.S. citizen? Where's your family from? Where'd you get that accent? Any of those things like that. You can ask if someone is fluent in another language if it's relevant to the position, and if you ask that question of every applicant. So it's only if it's relevant to the position and that you consistently ask about the other language in every interview for that position. But be careful with that. Also, you don't want to ask, have you ever been arrested? Because there will be a time that if you run background checks, you'll get to see criminal history if there is one when you run the background check at the appropriate time. And you don't want to discriminate against certain groups who have higher arrest probabilities than other demographic groups. When it comes to disability, the only question you can ask is, are you able to perform the essential functions of the job with or without reasonable accommodation? Now, I've rarely heard people actually say this out loud in an interview, but it is a question that you can ask, and probably is a good one to ask before you hire someone, to make sure they review your job description, which includes the physical requirements of the job, and that you say, can you perform the essential functions of this job with or without reasonable accommodation? So be careful with questions like that. Now let's talk about the first face-to-face interview or video interview, whoever you're doing it, right? Allow for the fact that the candidates might be nervous. Understand that people do get nervous. They do get anxious when they're being interviewed. That's okay. Try to help them relax a little bit, develop a little rapport at first by putting them at ease. It's okay to joke around a little bit for a minute in the beginning. Get them talking, get them relaxed, let them know that you understand that people get nervous, right? So what is the first impression you have? If you're not face-to-face and you can't do a handshake, we understand that. That's a traditional first impression thing, is eye contact and handshake. And right now during this pandemic, not a lot of people are shaking hands, but it is important to think about the first impression, right? Is someone smiling? Does someone seem positive, upbeat, energetic? What are they bringing to this interview? And then you, as the interviewer, you should always do more listening than talking. You should ask questions and listen. Ask questions and listen. I am a big talker, and I have to force myself to keep my mouth shut during an interview because the goal of the interview is to learn as much as you can about your candidate, not to sell yourself on the first interview. So ask questions, listen, ask other questions, listen more, and be aware of personal biases that you may have. Be aware of the effects of halo and recency. So the halo effect is I'm a University of Georgia graduate, so I'm a big Georgia Bulldog fan. Someone comes in wearing a little Georgia Bulldog shirt, and now all of a sudden they have an invisible halo above their head because they graduated from UGA, and I think they're great just because they graduated. And then I forget to ask them about their actual experience or anything else. So be aware of those little things that make you go, this person's great, even though you haven't actually had conversation with them yet. Recency effect would be you're talking to a candidate who has had one job every 6 months for the first 10 years of their career, and then the last job they held for 2 years. So you're just looking at their last job saying, oh, that's pretty good experience in 2 years, and discounting all of the history before that, which should tell you something. And typically when I see someone who has had a lot of jobs for a short period of time, I tend to stay away as an interviewer because I don't think we're that different, so different that we may be the only company on the planet that's going to be able to keep this person in a position for longer than 6 months or a year. I don't pretend to imagine what reasons existed for all of those changes. And sometimes it's okay to ask someone to walk you through their resume to explain all of that. But as a general rule, when I'm screening out candidates, I tend to look for people who stick with a company at least for a few years at a time because I want someone to stick with my company for at least a few years at a time. And then also be aware of any personal biases you have. Anything that you know is a turnoff to you, is automatic, sours you on a candidate. You need to know what those are and be able to look past those, or have other people on your team interview who don't share any personal biases you have. And that way you're helping to make a collective hiring decision instead of an individual decision. Reasons why companies make bad hires: they're desperate. We need somebody so bad. Here's a candidate. Let's hire this person. Or we got, 100 candidates. We screen them down to the top 5. Let's just pick one of those 5. I'm sure it'll be fine. That's laziness, right? You may interview those top 5 and still say it's not exactly right for us. You need to take time during your hiring process to make the right decision. Or sometimes the best of us get fooled. We interview someone who is a great interviewer and convinces us completely that he or she would do a phenomenal job, gets to work, and then is a total dud. That has happened to almost everybody I've ever known who hires people. So you try to do as much as you can to learn as much as you can by doing multiple interviews, assessments, reference checks, everything you can to make sure you learn about the candidate objectively. So most common mistakes when you're interviewing people, we'll talk about this. One is opening with a monologue. If you have a 30-minute interview or even an hour-long interview, if you spend the first 20 minutes opening with a monologue and saying, let me tell you about us and what we do and how we do it, now you've wasted a bunch of time because hopefully your candidate has already researched you and understands what you do and why he or she is attracted to this role and the company. And so you don't want to waste time on the meeting talking too much. What you want to do is ask questions and listen as much as possible. And then asking closed-ended questions. If you say, have you ever, blah, blah, blah. Yes. It just doesn't tell you that much, right? How many times have you had a customer who was upset with you because of a system issue that was beyond your control, right? Okay, tell me about the last time that happened. How did you respond to it? What words did you use? What did you say? And then in general, what do you do when you have a customer who's upset? How do you help to resolve that situation? How do you present a calming influence to that conversation? Right? Tell me how you do things. How have you done them? How will you do them here? Those are good questions. Asking leading questions are kind of silly. If you say, I'm looking for someone who's really smart in this role, are you smart? They're going to, of course, say, yeah, right? So you're just giving them the answer in the question, and they're going to feed it back to you, and there's just really no point in doing that. If you don't want to ask questions that create legal exposure, those are the questions we just talked about. You don't want to fail to pay attention. I know this seems weird, but yes, it happens. I have seen people who just zone out during an interview, especially when you're on a panel interview and someone else is doing the questioning, and then all of a sudden everybody looks at you and you're like, I wasn't even paying attention. So you owe it to the candidate to give them your attention, just like they owe you to give you their attention. You don't want to match stories of personal experience. Someone comes in and says, hey, I love fishing. It's one of my hobbies. Oh, me too. And then you start talking about fishing for a long time. And again, that's interesting and fun, but probably doesn't have a lot to do with the job unless you're interviewing someone to fish for you. Number 7 is selling before you're sold. And again, these are common mistakes that people make when they're interviewing. Selling before you're sold is before you know that you want to offer someone a position with your company, is telling them all about how great the job is, how great your team is, how great your company is, and convincing them that it's the best place in the world. And then at the end of the interview, you go, you know what, I'm not interested in this person. Well, now they're very interested in you. So you've created this mismatch, which can be awkward, and it's just better not to do that. You don't want to try to sell anyone on your company until you really want them. And that's when you say, hey, let me show you a little bit more about what we're about and how we do things, give you a realistic view of what it would be like to be here. And then the biggest mistake is failing to define and meet your interview objectives. If you don't know what you're going into the interview looking for, what questions you're going to ask, what are some fallback questions, then you're unprepared for the interview, and you need to be prepared to be professional. And the name of this brief presentation is How to Interview Like a Pro. So be prepared like a pro would be prepared. Here are a few more interview tips, right? Look for applicants who share your company values. This does not mean I need to find a candidate who looks like me, acts like me, thinks like me. That would be a mistake. You want people who are different, right? You want diversity in your on your team and in your company, diversity of thought, diversity of background, and everything else if you can, because that will only elevate the game. So you want to know the legal restrictions. We talked about that. Different kind of questions. So a factual question would be, how long did you work at company A, right? How many people reported to you? What were your responsibilities there? Those are factual questions, clarifying questions. It's good to understand what those are. Behavioral questions would be more like, how would you respond if? How did you respond if? Or how do you notice when you are getting stressed? Or if a customer cusses you out over the phone, how do you behave? How do you react? How do you notice when you're about to lose your cool? And what do you do to address that in a professional way, right? Specific questions, you can just go from kind of general questions to more specific questions. And for example, if we're hiring a payroll person, we may say, walk me through your audit checklist before you hit submit on a payroll, right? How do you audit yourself? Tell me specifically what you do step by step. And this kind of question is a great question because it helps you get to how someone works. And also, do they know how to do what you're asking them to do? Clarification questions, I think we talked about that. Don't be afraid of silence. Sometimes people need to think a little bit to come up with a good answer. If you're a good interviewer, you're going to ask them questions they have not been asked before. If you just say, tell me about your strengths, they're going to have 2 or 3 in the bag ready to pull out and give them to you, okay? And then if someone says, okay, here's my strength, say, give me a few specific examples of how you applied that. And if they struggle to do that, then it's probably not really a strength. If you say, tell me about a weakness, I always say there are a few answers that are not allowed to that question. And the answers are, I work too hard, I care too much. I really want to know about something that you need help with on the job. How can we help you be successful? How can we help you succeed? If you were to accept this job, are there things you might be nervous about? Are there some areas where you'd like to be refreshed? And we can talk to you about those as well. So pay attention to people's tone. Are they sarcastic? What is their body language? Because that's the way they're going to interact with your customers, your parishioners, your team members, right? And be aware of the message you are sending as well. Create a soft landing for hard questions. What that means is that if you're asking a tough question, you want to create a soft landing for it. So the difference between creating a soft landing and not is like this. Tell me about the biggest mistake you ever made in your career, or what's the worst thing you ever did in your job, right? That's a hard question, and candidates are not going to be comfortable answering that question. But if you create a soft landing for it by saying, look, we have all made the kind of mistakes in our career that were so painful that we won't forget them and we'll never make them again. And we understand that people make mistakes. That's only human. So talk to me about one of the most painful mistakes you made in your career that you won't forget and will never happen again. You know, it's a learning question. What did you do and what did you learn from that? What has changed, right? Another way to ask a question like that is, all of us in our careers have gotten positive feedback, which we really appreciate, which validates how we work and sometimes who we think we are. But we may have also gotten some constructive criticism along the way that may have stung at the time, but we felt was legitimate. And when we stepped back and thought about it, that really did make us think about how we operate, and we made changes along the way based on that feedback. So tell me about some of the feedback you've gotten that may have stung a little bit when you got it, but you realized it was legit and you took it to heart, and what did you do differently after that? And has that stuck with you? So those are good questions just to get to that kind of information. But you want to ask, competency questions. Do you understand what the job is about? How do you work? How do you go about your day? How do you plan your day, your week? What are your priorities? What do you think the priorities might be in this position? What would you want to learn your first month on the job if you were offered this position? How would you go about thinking through your first 30 days, 6 months, year? All of those are decent questions. I used to work with a consultant named Hub Kell. He was really good at interviewing folks, and he had a history of he was trained to be a professional interrogator, which is a little different than just interviewing, right? The field can be a little different, but he had some tricks which were interesting to know. And he always said, you can't pry out the truth, but you can create the environment where applicants want to tell you the truth. So it's not about manipulation, it's about comfort, right? If you reduce physical barriers, in other words, don't put a big desk between you and the person you're interviewing. Instead, maybe you sit next to them or around a round table, or you take a walk with them through your facility, your warehouse, and say, this is what it feels like to work here. This is what it smells like, looks like, everything else. So they get a realistic picture of what it's like to work there. It reduces the intimidation factor a little bit. Now, video interviewing and everything, it's harder to do that. It is what it is, but it's something to pay attention to once you get back to face-to-face interviewing. And then you want to focus as much as you can. Let them know that you're relaxed, which helps them relax. So smile, be relaxed. Don't be awkward or nervous when you're interviewing. If you feel that way, then you need to just practice a little more so you get better and better at it. Do some role playing with your team so you're comfortable with the process. And then withhold judgment. Don't make a quick judgment right out of the gate. Ask a few more questions, dig a little more, try to learn more about the person, because sometimes maybe it's an unconscious bias that you have that's making you judge someone right out of the gate, and you need to just give them a chance like you would give everybody else. So keep asking questions. Don't wrap it up within 30 seconds because that's kind of insulting. And learn as much as you can about the candidate. So when you talk with your team later about the next round of interviews, you're able to say, yeah, here's what I learned. Here are my notes. Here's what I think is relevant, etc. Clear up any misunderstandings, anything you weren't sure about along the way. Ask questions to follow up on that. And just remember that your leadership starts here. So when you're interviewing, be prepared. Know what the success profile for the position is. Know what you're trying to discover during the interview. Have your questions ready. Bring some positive energy to it. Help the person be relaxed. Ask the right kinds of questions so you can learn as much as you can about your candidate. Don't be afraid of silence. Let them think for a minute. Introverts like to think a little bit and process and give a quality answer, whereas extroverts will just start talking right away and the information will come to them after they start talking. So be aware that we're all different. We have different styles and different conversational habits and everything else. Allow for that and remember to withhold judgment and just learn as much as you can. And I hope that helps you to be a better interviewer.